It was another hot, humid day in Washington, D.C. The phone rang. I walked into the hospital room. My hand was shaking. I reached for the arm of my student. He was still. He had been shot in the back while walking home from a football game. Fast forward, years later, I stood on stage, about to receive a prestigious award. I had on this fitted blue suit and maroon tie. I felt the weight of thousands of eyes weighing on me. During the standing ovation, you know that moment when you're supposed to be happy and elated. My mind, it wandered to my student. Inside, I felt like a failure. I had done everything society told me I was supposed to do, and it still wasn't enough. I vowed on that day to explore new models and new ways to change the world. This is a part of that story. I was born in the United States, but made frequent trips to India when I was a kid. I remember at the end of a meal watching my grandfather as he would scoop every single grain of rice into his fingers and then drink the water that he was washing the plate with. His forearms, they were ripped, not from going to the gym, but from hand-washing clothes all day long. While overseas, I adapted to life without consistent running water or electricity. As a kid, I saw poverty firsthand, and as I grew up, I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to mission-driven work. By my early 20s, I had helped to start and was leading a nonprofit organization. We helped kids heal from violence and trauma by using education and the arts. I was impacted every day by the vicarious trauma of working with kids who had no breakfast before they came to school, kids whose dads were in prison, kids who didn't know where they were going to sleep at night because their families were being evicted from their homes. During the first 15 years of my nonprofit career, I tried to create impact with a fraction of the resources that a corporation would have to work with. I couldn't retain employees because I couldn't afford to pay them enough to stay. I relied on college interns who were juggling classes and final exams. I enlisted volunteers who couldn't make us their priority because they had full-time jobs. Y'all, I lived on the edge of burnout. And I kept telling myself that this is normal, that it's normal to not be able to get a steady paycheck, that it's normal to get 20 rejection letters before finally getting just one grant award, that it's normal to not be able to pay my staff what they're really worth. I kept telling myself this, but the crazy thing is, when I first started out, I wanted to be so wildly successful that I could one day close our doors because we were no longer needed. I mean, think about that, y'all. I wanted to put myself out of business. Mission accomplished, no more violence, no more inequity, thriving and healthy families. How incredibly naive I was. Traditional nonprofits are not effective vehicles to create social change. Nonprofits set us up for failure. I had bought into the facade. For every kid that we inspired and kept off the streets, there were millions of children whom our programs would never reach. And this reality, it kept tearing me apart. Until finally, I woke up one morning and I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled anymore by helping just a few thousand kids. I became a different type of greedy. I want more. I want us to be greedy for helping each other. I want us to be greedy for kindness and compassion. I want us to be greedy for generosity. I want us to dig and unearth the heart of the problem. You see, most dialogues that I have experienced around nonprofits and philanthropy, they focus on how to raise more money, how to build and inspire your team. Come on in, come on. I'm going to show you how you can maximize that impact. I actually believe that these dialogues are missing the main point. We have to build a world where nonprofits, charities, and philanthropies are obsolete. The nonprofit sector is financially too small to create systemic change. And we won't solve these problems. My friends, we're not going to solve these problems by simply asking our friends to donate money so we can build a school somewhere in India. We won't solve these problems by pestering our cousins at family barbecues hoping that they'll help us land a corporate sponsorship. We won't solve these problems by committing 1% of our company profits to charity. It is absurd. If you really think about it, it's absurd. And the reason is because nonprofits and philanthropies are products of an unjust and unhealthy economic system. Imagine this. It's like you took a Band-Aid and you placed it over your chest because you were suffering from heart disease. So by this point in my journey, I'm like 20 years in, right? And I'm chronically having a hard time sleeping at night. I'm waking up at 4 a.m. with stress dreams. But this is where it gets really interesting. I become hyper-fixated on developing a revenue-generating model because I was tired of relying on interns and volunteers and donations. We slowly built a partnership with Washington, D.C. government agencies to help launch a mental health program, which allowed us to take therapists and place them into public schools where they could work with kids who are struggling with deep anxiety, depression, conflict, and trauma. We then charged the insurance companies for the individual and group counseling sessions we were providing. Those reimbursement dollars began to help fund our organization and staff. This model skyrocketed our nonprofit from small and struggling and grassroots to growing and thriving. I mean, y'all, I literally felt like an apple fell on my head, or I cracked the code. Over the next few years, we almost doubled in size every year. By most standards in the nonprofit world, we were as successful as one could be. Ironically, it was after raising millions of dollars when I realized that the gravity of what we faced, it was larger than what any $50 or $500 million organization could ever possibly solve on its own. I learned that nonprofits and philanthropies are a distraction, preventing us from joining together all sectors of society to address and tackle the underlying problems. I began to think to myself, what if businesses did not delegate the massive work of healing to nonprofits, and instead, businesses, you invested your resources and talent to help us solve the greatest challenges of our time? I began to become really intrigued by this idea. How do we leverage and transform business? And so recently, with some friends, I launched a hybrid model collective that is defying and disrupting how traditional models operate. We're currently stewarding 125 acres of land near West Virginia, where we're creating a center for the healing arts and regenerative farming. We're a business, but we just don't care about only making money or turning a profit. Instead, we're creating a policy that requires us to make decisions based upon the impact of those actions 7 generations in the future. We believe in interdependence, and so we're also creating a 5-to-1 compensation cap. This means if our highest paid employee made $500,000, our lowest paid employee would make at least $100,000. Innovating new models that are beyond communism, that are beyond socialism, and that are even beyond capitalism. These are the ideas that are missing from our mainstream dialogue. You see, I have to start thinking more like a business for my nonprofit to become financially sustainable. In the same way, businesses have to start thinking and acting ethically more like nonprofits in order for humanity and our planet to survive. There is a moral sweet spot, and this is a really important part of the puzzle that needs governments to create guardrails that require second and third bottom lines for businesses and corporations that don't opt in to becoming socially and environmentally responsible. This process of sharing the burden and not diffusing responsibility will require divorcing the models we are currently married to. Over the past 20 years, some of the most courageous and compassionate people I've ever met have dedicated their lives to the nonprofit charity space. One by one, it has been our efforts and our resilience that has kept much of the planet still breathing. As ecosystems are collapsing, we don't have time left anymore to keep working on just the symptoms. And so lately, I've been thinking about this story, The Starfish Thrower, written by Lauren Isley. It goes a little something like this. One day, an old man was walking down the beach, and he saw a young girl who was throwing starfish back into the ocean. The old man stopped, and he asked, "What are you doing?" The young girl, she responds, and she says, "I'm throwing the starfish back in the water. If I don't, they'll die, washed up on the shore." The old man was perplexed, and he said, can't you see? There are miles of beach stretching in both directions, and there are millions of starfish washed up on the shore. You can't possibly make a difference. The young girl, a little defiantly, she bends down, she picks up another starfish, and she throws it back into the water. Smiling, she looks over at the old man and she says, "Well, I made a difference to that one." And this is where the story ends. This is the moment when we in the audience, many of us begin to smile, we begin to feel all warm and cuddly inside. We accept the young girl as the heroine. In many ways, I was like that little girl, unintentionally keeping all of you distracted. Let's put Hawah up on the gala stage. Let's clap for Hawah. Come on. Great job. Yeah, you did it. You helped keep a handful of kids out of prison. And as we hyper-glorify the small act, we lose sight on why we have to work just as hard, if not harder, to eliminate the need for prisons. Do you see? Do you feel me? We are celebrating the wrong action. And this is how our stories keep us trapped in the illusion and the facade. What if I told you there was a new story, a new ending to this story that we could write? What if we made two heroes? What if the old man and the young girl, what if they sat down together on the beach that day and then strategized around why the starfish were all washed up on the beach and then worked together to bring not just a handful, but to bring all the starfish home to safety? When I think back to years and years ago, and my student, he survived that gunshot wound, but he's never gonna walk again. And that is not good enough. I believe in our collective brilliance. I believe in the power of our imaginations. Y'all, that's why I'm still standing on a stage here today. I believe we can give birth to these new models and these new systems of thinking that will one day make nonprofits, charities, and philanthropies obsolete. This is the work ahead of us today, to create a new legacy for our children. This is the work ahead of us today, to go back into our communities and to become a different type of greedy. I invite you to join me, be a different type of greedy with me. Thank you.